Alright, guys, it happened again. I ranted and reacted to an article without actually pressing the record button. So, here we go again. Basically, there's this article on Ruptly discussing why did the U.S. actually exit the INF Treaty, and what you're not being told. So, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper is halfway through his tour of the Asia-Pacific region. The tour's timing, coming just weeks after Esper was officially sworn in, affirms that the notion of the Pentagon's top priority is China. Okay, moving on. Whoever sheds his blood for me today shall be my brother. The closing lines from William Shakespeare's play Henry V. These same words also apparently mark a corridor in a Pentagon hallway, which pays homage to the military cooperation of New Zealand and the United States, especially during World War II. I don't know this, but I do know thanks to U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper's recent statement as he arrived in New Zealand this week, part and parcel of a five-nation tour of the Asia-Pacific region, which also includes Japan, Mongolia, and South Korea. Having only just been sworn into the job on July 23rd, the aim of the tour is mainly to recruit anti-Chinese and anti-Iranian allies that the U.S. can rely on heavily to defend its interests in the Asia-Pacific region. I would even venture to bet that the recent mass shootings in the U.S. in the light of the Christchurch terror attacks in March this year barely attracted a mention behind closed doors between Esper and New Zealand government officials. Quite a risky contention, but I will find out if my assertion, that is the author, is true in about 20 working days, as the author has already requested the briefing notes from the meetings. Based on our posturing in the Middle East, and that in the Far East towards Asia, I'm beginning to think that we might be seeing the beginning of a new Cold War, where America does some posturing, China does some posturing, Russia responds to their posturing, and we get a new arms race in roughly the same region with a lot of the same players. It's kind of looking that way. It resembles a lot of old stories I've seen from before I was born about the early Cold War era. I mean, I wasn't born until 1990, but I always found the Cold War banter to be very entertaining in its own way. Anyway, despite the heavy focus of the U.S. government in the mainstream media regarding Iran and the Gulf region of late, I also suspect China would be more of a focus for official talks with Esper than Iran would be. Countries like New Zealand are more than happy to toe Washington's line with regard to the Iranian issue. Just ask any Iranian who has tried dealing with immigration in New Zealand. Let's frame this issue in another way. The U.S. doesn't want mid-range missiles stationed throughout the region to combat Iran. Anyone who thinks they do is simply put an imbecile. As foreign policy explained, the choice for Asia for his first international trip since he was confirmed was a deliberate one, designed to signal that Asia remains the department's top priority. That being said, the author doesn't need official information requests to determine if their assertions are correct or not, when they can just quote Esper directly. Our strategic competitors are China and Russia, principally in that order, Esper recently said. This can't be seen in the formal decision by the U.S. to exit the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces INF Treaty with Russia, or can be seen. While on the face of it, it looks as if the U.S. is directly taking action against Russia, and don't get me wrong, it totally is doing that as well. The fact remains that the U.S. wants out of this treaty because it was concerned it was limiting its ability to combat China in the Asia-Pacific theater. This isn't talked about often, but one needs to only look at the writings of some of the more influential and hawkish think tanks that typically do their utmost to assist U.S. foreign policy in order to see what I'm talking about. The author is talking about, I should say, as stated by Thomas G. Mencken, president of the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. He has experienced the treaty's shortcomings firsthand while serving as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under Secretaries Donald Rumsfeld and Robert Gates. Since China was not part of the agreement, it was not required to follow the treaty's rules. As a result, it was unconstrained in pursuing not only theater nuclear capabilities, but also land-based conventional precision strike systems today. China possesses up to 2650 land-based missiles of types that would be banned if it was party to the INF. These weapons, most of which are non-nuclear, pose a threat to U.S. and allied air bases in the Western Pacific, as well as U.S. and allied naval forces, principally U.S. aircraft carriers. This is also the current strategy of the Trump administration, according to Esper himself, who openly referred to China's missile arsenal while stating that 80% plus of their inventory is intermediate-range systems, so that shouldn't surprise them that we would want to have a like ability. Right, because this seems like a lot of military posturing designed to sort of arm up for another arms race, with the emphasis being on China rather than Russia. Cold War 2.0. I'm telling you right now. We are posturing in Asia so that China will think twice before challenging us to a military altercation. Thankfully, Australian officials have confirmed that they won't be allowing Australia to be used as a base to deploy intermediate-range conventional missiles. Washington's desire to detonate and convert the Asia-Pacific region into a war zone puts countries like Australia and New Zealand in uncomfortable positions. Yes, security cooperation with the Pentagon is important, and these countries do enjoy hiding under the U.S. nuclear umbrella, but China is also Australia's largest trading partner. This sentiment was even confirmed by Australia's Foreign Affairs Minister Maurice Payne, who said it's not in anybody's interest for the Indo-Pacific to become adversarial in character. So we work closely with our key partners, with our strongest alliance partner, the U.S., and our key trading partner, China, to pursue those issues of stability and security and prosperity. Which is probably why Australia is willing to make some concessions to appease its American counterpart. Not only did it heavily participate in its illegal invasion of Iraq, it was involved in bombing Syrian government troops in 2016, illegally again. It is also now mulling over the idea of joining the U.S.-led effort to protect Western shipping interests in the Persian Gulf. It's called the Persian Gulf, but perhaps it needs a name change to reflect America's ownership of the area. I would call it Gulf of Warhawks, since that's what we've become. Just a few days ago, Esper described China's destabilizing behavior as disturbing, which is ironic to say the least given Esper's military service in the First Gulf War. He also said that the U.S. will not stand by idly while any one nation attempts to reshape the reason to its favor at the expense of others. Right, because only we get to do that. Esper only really got the job due to his vehemently aggressive stance on any and all things related to China, making him the top dog to ultimately replace Mad Dog in Trump's eyes. Esper's arrival in New Zealand also coincides with the Trump administration's reckless decision to label China a currency manipulator. I call it reckless not because it's either true, that is, the author doesn't call it, is true or untrue, factually speaking, but because the repercussions of this move appear to be far-reaching. Trump also just recently threatened to place another 10% tariffs on $300 billion in Chinese goods starting from September onwards. The position of Australia and New Zealand in this situation is unenviable, because on one hand, they love having U.S. protection, but they also love trading with China. So when the two start fighting, you can kind of see where the issue lies, and really they don't know what to do. But in preparation for Washington's ambitious vision for this part of the world, headed by Esper himself, China released a defense white paper at the end of July which heavily criticized what Beijing sees as an American pursuit of absolute military superiority. Furthermore, October will see a fresh round of talks on the second draft of a maritime code of conduct in South China Sea between China and Southeast Asia countries. These talks are seen as being relatively successful to date, particularly in easing the tensions plaguing the South China Sea, were not for constant U.S. intervention. Since Trump has been in office, the U.S. has carried out 13 freedom of navigation operations specifically intended to combat China. While the U.S. would love to see the regime change in Iran and is clearly working hard towards that end, the evidence shows that a much more long-term goal is the containment of Beijing, including and especially with regard to China's rapidly growing presence in the Asia-Pacific region. Even though countries such as New Zealand and Australia rely on a strong trading relationship with China, it will be interesting to see the extent to which they kowtow to the U.S. demands in helping to push back against China's perceived aims of dominating the region. China has ultimately presented itself in a fairly threatening manner in general, but so have we. This is the sort of typical warhawk posturing that led to things like the Cold War, and we are seeing more of that now. I'm telling you, man, right now, Cold War number 2 is on its way. That's what we're doing. We're threatening each other, we're posturing, we're doing exactly what we did in the late 70s through the 80s. And you know, Russia's not going to have any of it. Trump pulled the INF Treaty quite possibly so that he could posture in Asia with great impunity without that getting in the way. Trump's restarting the Cold War, and he's going to be our generation's Reagan. Oh gee, I hope he doesn't get Alzheimer's and lose his mind. Not that he'd have much to lose, depending on what aspect of his intelligence we're talking about. Anyway,